desire, and in the approaches to the first two trance states, dhyana, it is called delight, because it only delights the mind. During the first two trance states, it is called both pleasure and delight, because it delights both body and mind. In the approaches to the third trance state, and in the actual trance state, it is called pleasure, because it is calm, heavy, and without discrimination. The feeling of oppression associated with the first 5 consciousnesses is always called suffering, dukkha. Associated with mental consciousness, according to one interpretation, it is nothing but sorrow, because it oppresses the mind, and because the holy teachings say that the feeling of discomfort in the realm of thought is called the faculty of sorrow. The Yogacarabhimi Sastra says, as soon as retribution commences among those sentient beings in the purgatories, there is retribution that generates a feeling of sorrow. It also says, those in the purgatories also have the sorrow of applied and sustained thought, as do a part of animals and hungry ghosts, preta. Therefore we know that feelings of heavy discomfort in the realm of manas are called sorrow, and even more so are the other light discomforts.
There is an interpretation that sorrow takes 2 forms. Among humans and celestials, it is always called sorrow, because it is not heavy. Among animals and hungry ghosts, it is called either sorrow or suffering, because the feeling may be heavy or light depending on whether the feeling is pure or mixed. In purgatory, naraka, it is called suffering, only because the feeling is unadulterated, heavy, and without discrimination. The Yogacarabhimi Sastra says, the 3 feelings can be active with all spontaneously generated passions. The details are as mentioned earlier. The Yogacarabhimi Sastra also says, the innate view of a person is only indeterminate in nature, and the same must be true of extreme views. Suffering accompanying these views is not categorized as the faculty of sorrow, because the treatise says that the faculty of suffering is not indeterminate. It also says, in the purgatories, the other 3 faculties definitely do not occur, and that is also the case with animals and hungry ghosts whose suffering is unadulterated. The other 3 are certainly pleasure, delight, and sorrow, because these beings must be provided with active indifference. It is objected, is it not true that adventitious indifference is not active among them? We reply, how do you know that the passage, from the treatise, is speaking only of adventitious feelings? You must not say that those beings definitely possess the faculty of thought, because the 6 adventitious consciousnesses are sometimes absent. It must not be that the treatise is speaking only of adventitious feelings, because there is no reason for speaking of the faculty of thought. Also, if the treatise is speaking with reference to adventitious feelings, how can we definitely speak of those beings as having 8 faculties?
If you claim that the 8th is the faculty of sorrow, because the 5 sense consciousnesses do not form an unbroken series, then how can the faculty of sorrow exist at birth, death, and in a faint? We offer the same objection to the opinion that the 8th faculty is the faculty of suffering. The opinion that the 8th faculty is the sex organ is unreasonable, because a sex organ is uncertain in the purgatories, because due to evil karma, beings can be sexless. They must have eyes, etc., because the 5 organs are made to suffer as a consequence of evil karma. But of what use is a sex organ in the purgatories? There can be no hope for sexual intercourse in Avicii, the great purgatory. Thus the 8th faculty is definitely the faculty of indifference, because it is associated with the 7th and 8th consciousnesses. Just as in the realm of ultimate pleasure the comforting of mind is called a pleasure, and there is no faculty of delight, in places of ultimate suffering, the vexation of mind is called suffering, and there is no faculty of sorrow. Therefore the 3 faculties, mentioned in the Yogacarabhimi, are doubtless sorrow, delight, and pleasure.
Other sources say that beings in the purgatories have pleasure as efflux of former karma, but you must understand that this is a concession to other schools, or it refers to situations where feelings are mixed. Beings in the purgatories have no pleasure as retribution, and these places are therefore called pure suffering. However, as for the holy teaching saying that the feeling of discomfort associated with thought is called the faculty of sorrow, that means, in many cases, or else, it is a concession and does not really contradict our position. Also, the the earlier statements of the Yogacarabhimi Sastra that say, as soon as retribution begins in the beings born in the purgatories, there is retribution that generates sorrow, and that say, those in the purgatories have the sorrow of applied and sustained thought, as do some animals and hungry ghosts, are also concessions.
Also, as for the faculty of suffering associated with mental consciousness, it resembles the sorrow of other realms of suffering, and therefore we may roughly speak of it as sorrow. Alternately, we can call it sorrow because, although categorized as the faculty of suffering, it injures body and mind, just as we also call the approaches to trance states pleasure, because, although the faculty of delight, it benefits body and mind. This is the interpretation of such works as the Vaikuntha Sastra. However, it is certain that in the stage prior to arrival at the first trance state, there is no faculty of pleasure, because the Yogacarabhimi Sastra says that there are only 11 faculties at that stage. Consequently, you should realize that the feeling of grief in the area of manas, in places where feeling is of unadulterated suffering, is also categorized as suffering. This feeling is distinguished under many topics in the holy teachings, but these will not be pursued here for fear of prolixity.
9. Simultaneity of the three feelings. There is an interpretation that the three feelings, pleasure, suffering, and ncither, are not simultaneously present in the six sense consciousnesses, because they are mutually contradictory when evolving in relation to external objects. Mental consciousness associated with the first five has the same object that they have, and if the five are associated with the three feelings, then so is mental consciousness. This violates reasoning, and therefore, the six consciousnesses must not be associated with the three feelings simultaneously. When the Yogacarabhimi, Sastra, and other texts say that store consciousness at a single instant occurs together with the three feelings associated with the six evolving consciousnesses, they mean during a plurality of instants, just as the expression one mind does not refer to a single generation and extinction. Thus there is no contradiction.
There is an interpretation, by Dharmapala, that the three feelings can be simultaneously present in the six sense consciousnesses, because it is possible for agreeable, disagreeable, and neutral objects to be experienced simultaneously, and because thought does not necessarily have to experience the same object as the other five. It generates a single feeling when it is fixed on a definite object, perceived by one of the five senses, but when not fixed it generates indifference. Consequently, the three feelings can occur simultaneously in the six consciousnesses. When one has reached the state of freedom, the six consciousnesses are associated with pleasure, delight, and indifference only, because Buddhas have eliminated everything that is sorrowful and full of suffering.
10. Universal mental activities and those with specific objects. We have briefly explained the 6 groups of mental activities, but now we must speak in some detail of their specific characteristics. What are the characteristics of the first 2 groups? First, universal mental activities, contact, etc. Next, those with specific objects, that is, desire, resolve, memory, samadhi, and discernment, whose objects are not the same.